稣同在，就是天堂。无论遥远何处地方，高山平原，沙漠草场，我举大恩，我主小风，耶稣同在，就 说，你的哥哥亚伦要对法老说，容以色列人出他的地，我要使法老的心刚硬，也要在埃及地多行神迹奇事。但法老必不听你们，我要伸手重重地刑罚埃及，将我的军队以色列民从埃及地领出来。我伸手攻击埃及，将以色列人从他们中间领出来的时候，埃及人就要知道我是耶和华。摩西、亚伦这样行，耶和华怎样吩咐他们，他们就照样行了。摩西、亚伦与法老说话的时候，摩西80岁，亚伦83岁。这个时间，告诉你号。
Hallelujah. Today is a blessed Lord's Day. So last week we had a summer retreat, and the Lord's Day was actually in the middle of it. So we actually gave Sunday worship during the summer retreat. I'm thinking it might actually be the first time that something like this happened in the history of mankind, that we actually had, a conference, a retreat that was solely online. And through everything that God has prepared until now, even though it was a conference that was held entirely online, a lot of the people that were overseas, including the people in China, a lot of people actually, was able to partake in the retreat together. A lot of them received a lot of grace, and it was a very precious time for all of us. And right now we are going through, by faith, Moses. And through the words about Moses in the book of Exodus, we have been actually carrying that theme throughout the entire summer retreat. And we have been actually continuously talking about that during the Lord's Day sermon as well. So for 3 days and 4 nights of the summer retreat, we talked about the wilderness, the blessing of the church in the wilderness. The blessing of the church in the wilderness. So it's actually talking about the process of the church going through the wilderness, but it's actually the work of God that's actually taking place. So whether it is the individual or whether it is the church, no matter what generation, no matter who it may be, this is actually the work that God is continuously doing in everyone's lives. And so the topic of this summer retreat was the blessing of the church in the wilderness, but it's not something that's a totally new concept, but this is actually something that is already taking place in the lives of the believers who are already, little by little, attaining salvation in their life by faith. And if you are truly people who are gaining more of that kind of faith from first to last, that I'm sure that as you were listening to today's sermon, as you were listening to the sermon during the summer retreat, I'm sure that you will really be able to take it as a message for you and take it to heart, where it was a message so that you can actually attain more of salvation. And I'm thinking that it would have been a very precious time of grace for you. So let's repeat into the blessing of the Church of the Wilderness. So during the time of Moses, through the Israelites, God actually did his work of Exodus, which is bringing them out of Egypt, which is basically salvation. And they spent 40 years in the wilderness, and they also entered into the land of Canaan. So no matter who it is, the work of salvation and the relaying of the gospel is even happening. The same thing is happening even now. And that's why the work of salvation, which is Exodus for the Israelites, and 40 years in the wilderness, and then entering into the land of Canaan. First, through Moses' life of 80 years, through this individual, this was actually the work that God has done through an individual's life. He spent 40 years in the royal palace of Egypt, and 40 years in the wilderness of Midian, and so total 80 years of his life. This was Moses' life story, but it was also the history of God's salvation, saving Moses. And the year he turned 80, God calls Moses. And he appears before Moses through the burning bush. And tells Moses of the work that he is going to do through Moses of bringing the Israelites out of Egypt and spending time in the wilderness and entering into the land of Canaan. So it is the work that he has done through Moses. And this is also the work that he is going to do through the Israelites. And so when he was sending Moses to the Israelites, this is what Moses said. Will they listen to me? Will they believe in my words? And if they ask me who sent me, then what should I tell them? And then the work that he has done in Moses' life for 80 years. And also the work that he is going to do through the Israelites. Of having them brought out of Israelites, saving them out of Egypt. The Lord tells Moses, go before them and perform these 2 miracles. And then he asks Moses, what is that in your hand? And Moses says, it's a staff. He says, throw it on the ground. And when he did, turned into a snake. And as soon as Moses saw that, the reflex just ran away from it. And of course, that's normal. But the Lord tells Moses, take the snake by its tail. And as soon as he actually took hold of it by its tail, it became a staff again. So this was the first miraculous sign. And during the 80 years of Moses' life, the work of salvation that God did in his life, and also the work that he is going to do through the Israelites, through Moses, this is actually the miraculous sign that is basically foreshadowing all the works that he is going to do. And then he says this, I am the God of your fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. What does that mean? All the works that he has shown through the miraculous signs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the works that he has done, which is salvation, all of that is actually inside that miraculous sign. And also within the 80 years of Moses' life, it is also the work that he has done. So he says, go to the Israelites and perform these miraculous signs, which means that he is also going to do the same same work of salvation through the Israelites as well. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses. The work of salvation that he has done through them. And so through Moses, this is the work of salvation he is going to do for the Israelites. And there's no one that has been bitten by a snake greater than Moses, by Pharaoh. Not only that, by also his brothers, his own people, someone that he actually helped save. He tried to, basically save his own people, and yet they were the ones that betrayed him. Not only that, a very big snake took everything away from him and even tried to take his life away. But there was God's salvation within that. And I talked about this during the retreat. The staff was all he had left. And with that, all he did was just work as a shepherd and was barely able to survive and put food in his mouth. So in his life, it was basically just Moses and his staff. So all the things that he had. Is basically summarized by that one staff in his hand. Throw it on the ground. And it turned into a snake. So you will know as you live life. All the things that we have and all the things that we try to do to live, as much as we try, that staff in our life and through the things that I have, and even through the works that I am actually doing, it will never leave the work of the snake. And so whether we know it or not, this is the truth of living life. And so as you are continuously living this kind of life, then you will be just left with a life of running away. A life where you have been bitten by a snake. It's actually showing us through your life. My life is like that. And this is the work that God is doing through everyone's life. This is the word of salvation. When he says, take the snake by the tail, and it turns into a staff. And from that moment on, Moses' life is truly different. It's simply a staff in his hand, and yet that staff became the mystery of how to live his life. And also, it became the power and the authority that helped bring the Israelites out of Egypt. As you well know, in front of Pharaoh. All he did was just go to Pharaoh with that staff in his hand. But he also showed that the power to overcome the world was within that staff. He took it by the tail, and it became a staff. This is a miraculous sign. And so I tell you this. The offspring of woman will crush its head, and the snake will strike his heel. This is a miraculous sign that is revealing that covenant, and that covenant was from the time of Adam and until the second coming of Jesus. This is actually a covenant he made to himself. And from the time of Adam until the second coming of Jesus, this was actually the work of salvation that he has been doing. And so I tell you this. The descendants of Seth, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses. The Bible is actually testifying to us about this. And so it's not simply recording the history of mankind. Time to time, of course, history of mankind is written in the Bible, but the reason for that is for the sake of salvation, because of the work of salvation that God has done. Those people that are in the Bible were written in the Bible for the sake of salvation. Those people who have been clothed by God's grace. And their names are written in the Bible and their lives are recorded in the Bible. And yet it's not because that person, that man is important. It's not because their life was so precious, but it was God who did his work of salvation through that individual and through this individual's life. So everyone, whether you know this or not, this is the truth. And I keep telling you this. That's the very reason that God actually created us in our mother's womb. In order to reveal that work of salvation, he has allowed us to come into this world and allowed us to live life here on earth. And whether we know this or not, that is the truth. So one day you and I have received grace, and we say that we have received salvation. And from that moment on, we say that we live a life of sanctification. But all of that is actually inside this miraculous sign that he showed. But even if it's just a little bit at a time, just like how Apostle Paul have testified, for in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed. Because this is where salvation lies. This is where life is. By faith. From first to last. So whether we know it or not, that faith in our lives is the faith that has come by the light, allowed us to realize, and we were able to experience. And the more we are able to discover this fact taking place in our life, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob will become your God. And you will be able to discover that, but not only that, you will be able to come to believe it. Not only that, the work of Exodus that happened during the time of Moses. It's the story of Moses, but also you will realize that it is actually your story. The Exodus that happened during the time of Moses and the Israelites coming out of Egypt, not only is their story, but it is now your story in our life and in our family and in our church. So if it is not this, we say that we believe, and yet the gap that you experience between your life and Moses' life will be very big. And you will think of the Israelites, and it will be very far from you, far removed from you. Moses is not something that you will have to believe. You will come to just believe. It will be believable. The reason is because it is actually taking place in your life. And that's why God is telling us this. Do you think Moses knew what was happening to his life? The God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, God of the living. Do you think that Moses knew that he was going to live his life like this? 80 years later, God appeared to him before Moses through the burning bush. And he was basically sending Moses to Israelites and said, perform these 2 miraculous signs to them. And I think, maybe Moses was able to confirm as he was looking and watching those 2 miraculous signs happening before him. And he said, they will know that I am the God of their fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. So these were words of confirmation for Moses. So you and me, even if it's just a little bit at a time, God will allow us to live by faith from first to last. This is basically the same thing. And someone actually wrote this on their Facebook. As they were listening to my message, I really do not understand what he's actually talking about. It seems like it is a message that has been totally removed from my life. And yet I don't know how I was able to still continue listening to this message. And it's not that I was able to actually hear it all of a sudden, but for some reason I was able to still continue to listen to this word. And starting from one moment, I was able to actually start listening to, I was able to hear and understand his message. And the reason was because he was actually talking about my story, my life story. And all I was doing was basically talking about the work of salvation that God is doing in the people of in the lives of believers. But why was it that the message that felt like that it had nothing to do with me, that one day, little by little, you come to realize, oh, he's actually talking about my life. And it's not that you're able to actually understand because it seemed like your life, but within the work of God's salvation that he's actually doing in your life, that word has already come upon you as the grace of salvation. And you are basically experiencing it as the power of God's salvation through the Word. And so the more you listen to the message, it's no longer, oh, I have to try and understand what he's saying. It's more like, the more you hear it, the more you will realize and understand. This is a fact that is undeniable. You have no choice but to believe it because it's believable. And so you yourself don't even know what's happening in your life, but it is by faith which is given to you by God. And it goes hand in hand with works. And therefore you are actually able to experience it little by little in your life. And that's why I tell you this, people really do not know this very well. And I'm not saying this because I'm some kind of an arrogant person. I also do not know this very well. However, more and more, to say that I know doesn't mean that I know within my own level. And of course, there is some aspect of that. But just like how Apostle Paul confesses, the knowledge of Christ is the highest of all wisdom or knowledge. And that knowledge is very different from the way we used to learn about Jesus and the gospel. And that's why I tell you, only the work that God has done, that is true salvation. So whether we know it or not, as much as God has revealed his work of salvation in our life, we have no choice but to actually experience it and taste it in our life. And so yesterday I was actually talking on the phone with someone. And it's a process of where this person has come across a very difficult problem in their life. And people were actually telling him that you need to request this kind of test to be done. And everyone actually telling him like, okay, this is how you need to do it. And so if it's the work that God is doing in this person's life, then yeah, this person should do the test. And if, it takes place, then it's going to take place. And if it doesn't take place, then it doesn't take place. And so no matter how much people actually told them that you need to do it this way or that way, it's not like our standard changes all of a sudden. This person basically just ended up doing based on their own standard because this was the first time for them actually doing this. And this person basically said, I was totally embarrassed. And the person who was actually the judge over that contest basically ripped him apart. And on his way home, and the person who even helped him go in that competition, they were like, how is it that you couldn't even do this when everyone just all you had to do was just, be there? So at that time, there was not even an inkling of hope for him to actually win the contest because he already could tell that he did not win. After a few days, he got a message. You actually passed. result. When he got the message that he actually passed the results, without even him knowing, he already knew from the beginning, it was God who actually did this. Because this is a miracle. As he was listening to the message, he realized this is a miracle that happened in his life. And so this is what this person shared as he was talking with me on the phone. As he was actually watching what was happening during that test, and he felt like, he was going to fail anyways, do you think that he was actually praying during that time? He probably didn't, because he could already tell. He came to the conclusion that he didn't pass. And in his own standard, he actually gave up, and he just let it go. However, this has nothing to do with me. How was it that the person who was actually helping him also said that this was a miracle? The person who was actually presiding and judging over that contest basically, shamed him, and he was totally embarrassed during that competition. But why was it that he was actually able to pass? And he told his son. And the son said, this is definitely done by God. Everyone, is actually the reality that God has shown and revealed to the believers. And that reality does not change in Jesus Christ. And that reality can appear to us as faith in our hearts, right? Not only that, we can actually experience it physically in our life as some kind of a result. It can manifest physically as well. And I tell you, it does manifest, and yet that manifestation is not the actual reality. The reality is the work of God's salvation, which is the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that actually comes to us as faith, by faith, because it is that faith that has saved us. And so, like I have told you before, He allows us to live by faith from first to last. So we do need our own level of faith, and yet the gospel salvation is actually something that God does. And therefore we need to recognize that it is by grace. And only then will we be able to understand that it was God who allows us to live by faith from first to last. And therefore we are able to attain that reality of faith. And so this is not something that you can just listen and it'll take place. That's why Moses had to go through 40 years, in total 80 years. This is the work that God has done in Moses' life. This is his life salvation of life. And so God's project of saving Moses and all the Israelites, bringing them out of Egypt and taking them into the land of Canaan, this is actually clearly shown in the Bible, whether we know this or not. If you don't know this, then that moment that you first receive salvation, that joy, that's what you hold on to for the rest of your life. And there's a lot of people who meet the golden calf as their God as well. But they also believe in Jehovah God. They believe in Jesus. And these are not the stories of a non-believer. And we can see that through the Israelites in the wilderness. And then God tells them to do the second miraculous sign. If they don't believe you after the first miraculous sign, then they will believe you after the second. And so what was the second miraculous sign? He says, place your hand in your cloak. And when he did and took it out, his hand was leprous. So he was actually shocked, and it's disgusting. But he tells Moses to place his hand in the cloak again, and when he did, leprosy actually represents sin. It's sin. But he says, put it in your cloak. Put it in your cloak. And when he actually did, it came out as his restored hand. And so the work of God that takes place through sin, what do you see through that incident? It's actually God's covenant. And that's why these two miraculous signs was the work that he actually did in the 80 years life of Moses. And through that very Moses who went through that kind of process, he used him to take the Israelites out of Egypt and take them and guide them into the land of Canaan. Are you receiving the grace of salvation? The grace will continue to reveal. And you will see greater the sin. And people are more shocked because of that. Place the hand back in the cloak. And it's very difficult to do that. And that's right. The work that God does is not that difficult. Because that covenant was actually the covenant, a promise he made to himself. And so regardless of us, until the second day of Jesus, until the second coming of Jesus, he is continuously fulfilling his promise and revealing it as his work of salvation. However, why is it so difficult for us? No matter how we see it, everyone in this world is living a life where they have been bitten by a snake, and even the believers, their life is nothing different from those of the non-believers. And what's the only thing that does not take place in people's life? This is the only thing that they are unable to experience in their life. And to that degree, they can't deceive their life, what's happening, and therefore people cannot deceive. And that's why it's very difficult for people to even survive and, place food in their mouth. But even if it's just a little bit at a time, it is the same me, and it's the same life where we have all been bitten by a snake. However, the power of salvation, not only when we first received salvation, but by faith from first to last. Through the lives of the believers where God allows them to live by faith from first to last. This is how we need to change. If not, then we will never be able to escape from that level of just barely putting food in our mouth, because even that will become very difficult. It does not mean that you have to, somehow do well. We have to change. That's the power of salvation. Through what we have. Like I told you earlier, I'm very lacking. I can't even speak well. This person, even though, they basically prepared everything, they couldn't even achieve it. And so through the life where these people are living, we also are nothing compared to them either. Our level, we think that we are not able to live because of our own level, but it's not. Because the kingdom of God belongs to those who are like young children. What does that mean? Even if it's just a little bit at a time, shall live by faith from first to last. Then that faith needs to be like that of young children, and yet it is the type of faith that overcomes the world. Amen? David became the king of the Israelites. And amongst one of his psalms, he actually confesses this. This is a confession towards God. My spirit is like a young child that is in his mother's arms. And this is how the reality of the believers should be like. But it's probably different. We are lacking. However, by faith, what is different? God is with us. The life that we were unable to live, even with all the wisdom and knowledge of this world. And we are ignorant. And we are all fools. And we are all weak and lacking. However, that is the mystery and the power for us to be able to live in this world. And we don't even know how to live like that. We're always on riding the curtails of the people, the wise and the knowledgeable people of this world. But if you are carefully watching the people who are true believers, at times it seems like they are powerless, and it's very frustrating. Why is it that they always have to do it that way? But I'm not saying that there are no needs for methods. And I'm not saying that we do not need any effort of mankind. But what I'm saying is whether there is or not, to say that we live by faith means that I already am no longer living my life as my life, but it is Christ who is living my life through me. And it is not something that you can actually see, but through my life that is invisible. In the background, it is actually God who is living my life through me. Therefore, these two miraculous signs are truly important. Because if it is not for this mystery, you live your life and yet you have no mystery to live. And so no matter how much you try, so with the little grace that you receive, you might be used to maybe help other people. But your life afterwards, after salvation, you will have no solution in order to survive and be victorious in this world. And you will not be able to help other people receive that same solution because you so also do not have it. And therefore, now Moses enters into Egypt, and first God allows him to meet Aaron. And there's no reason to show it to Aaron because God already prepared everything. And God said he will greet you with joy. And so with Aaron, they meet the elders of Israel. And there, all the works that God has done in Moses' life and all the words he gave to them. And not only that, God told them to show them the sign. And so they performed those 2 miraculous signs. And when they did, the elders of Israel worshipped God. And they confessed, God has finally seen us. And they accept Moses and Aaron by faith. And so I said how great it would be if they just kept on going in that kind of a state. And this is the work that he has done in Moses' life. Appears through a miraculous sign, and yet this is the reality. And this is also the work that he is going to do to the Israelites through that very Moses. And so, through Moses' words and also the miraculous sign, God is actually shedding his light upon the elders of the Israelites after 430 years. And so the work of salvation that God is planning to do for the Israelites has already come upon the elders of the Israelites first. And so it was such a precious thing. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron finally goes before the Pharaoh. Who is Moses and who is Aaron? And already the Hebrews in Egypt, they're considered as slaves. And so they were slaves to Pharaoh, but also slaves to all of Egyptians. And so Aaron and also Moses. So if he was in the outside and came back into Egypt, he basically came into slavery because all Hebrews were slaves. But that very Moses and Aaron, they actually stood before Pharaoh. Why is it that Moses and Aaron were standing before Pharaoh? In order to save the Israelites. In order to fulfill God's work of salvation. And that's why they were standing before Pharaoh. And so if we only look through the things that were visible, is this a fight that they can actually win? Because they're slaves and the other is a king. Saying that, let me take the Israelites and give sacrifice to our God. And these were words that are very difficult to even actually start speaking. And so the history of the Israelites and the work of Exodus is actually showing God's work as a foreshadow. And to that degree, Egypt is actually representing the world. And the one who is ruling over that Egypt, and we see his authority, we know that authority, you should be able to see that authority is actually the authority of the darkness, the one who is the ruler of the kingdom of this air. Isn't this really interesting? Until Joseph and all of the generation died. When Joseph was 40 years old, Jacob actually brought 70 Israelites into Egypt. And so for 70 years that Joseph was alive in Egypt, let's say, it's about 100 years. But all the Israelites that lived in Egypt, during the time of Joseph, they were very great in number and they were very numerous. And it was the same Egypt then. And it was the same Pharaoh that was ruling over Egypt. This Pharaoh was actually used to bless the Israelites and to help the Israelites. But when Joseph and all of his generation died, I told you these are not your simple words. A new Pharaoh came about who did not know of Joseph. What does this represent? This is basically describing a generation that has lost hold of the covenant. And so does that mean God is actually doing his work of fulfilling his covenant and then he's resting? No, he does not change. And this is the work that he's continuously doing without change through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and also through his descendants, especially Joseph and his people of that generation. Why did they receive blessings? It's the same Egypt, it's the same world. It's the same Pharaoh that's ruling over Egypt. However, he was used as a channel to bless them. And the Israelites were basically revealing the glory of God. How? By faith. But after Joseph and his generation all died, little by little, they lost hold of the covenant. And it became weak. It means God is still doing his work. However, we have been deceived and entered into the darkness for 430 years. Basically showing this through the Israelites in Egypt. What happened? You know it very well. One day, the Israelites basically became the slaves of Egypt. And he actually places foremen and watchmen over those Israelite slaves. And through their labor are able to build 2 cities. But not only that labor. He actually orders all the midwives and tells them to kill all the Hebrew boys. The same Egypt, same Pharaoh. However, the Israelites that were living in Egypt at that time, it was a life of blessing. A life in Egypt was a life of blessing during the time of Joseph. However, they were still in that same land. However, the Israelites more and more became slaves to labor. And the forces of death kept on chasing after them. So everyone, With this, you need to be able to see Exodus. How God brought Israelites out of Egypt. And that's why I told you this during the conference. And so Exodus is actually representing bringing the Israelites out of Egypt, allowing them to meet God. And this was a salvation of foreshadow of salvation. What is this actually trying to show us? Because there is a spiritual meaning behind this. They are truly the people of covenant. And they were truly Israelites who were blessed, chosen people of God, but they have lost hold of the covenant. As much as they were walking down the path of life that had nothing to do with God's salvation, then the state of their life is the same. With what? It's the same as the failed lives of non-believers. Isn't that the truth? Look at the believers today. I'm sure not everyone is like that, but for the majority, if you just look at the percentage-wise, are they better off than the non-believers? If you really look at it that way, do we receive more blessings than the non-believers? No, there's probably more believers who are suffering in their life than the non-believers, the way I see it. And so the work of Israelites coming out of Egypt is actually a foreshadow of God's salvation. But you should not actually substitute the non-believers in there as Israelites, because this is actually the message he is giving to the believers, the current believers. So everyone. So Moses and Aaron. Said words that were very hard to even speak. What does they say? What do they say? You know, they say words that are unspeakable, and Pharaoh listens to those words and he's basically scoffing at them and saying, you are speaking unspeakable words, just go and do your work. It's the same for Aaron and Moses. He doesn't even heed to their words. Not only that. Pharaoh says, I don't even know this Jehovah God you're talking about. And then he tells his foreman and also his watchmen, don't even give them straw to make brick, and make them get their own straw. But do not lessen their quota. So before, I think it was the Egyptians who provided straw to the Israelites. But now, they have to gather their own straw, but still meet their quota. Because even the quota that they had now were still something that they had to struggle in order to meet. And that's why they were unable to meet their quota, because it was so difficult. And because they did not meet their quota, the watchmen were basically beating the slaves. And that's why the foreman actually went before Pharaoh and actually said, this is too much. How can you not provide us a straw and actually tell us to meet the same quota? They're actually hitting us and abusing us. It is their fault, but it is also your fault as well. And that's what they say. All they did was just confirm the scary words of Pharaoh. Maintained the same quota, and only then did the foreman realize that they were in trouble. What did they do? They were on their way out, and on their way they meet Moses and Aaron. So what do they say? Exodus chapter 5, verse 20. I will read. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them. And they said, "May the Lord look upon you and judge you. You have made us a stench to Pharaoh, and his officials have put a sword in their hand to kill us." Everyone, they were already being killed by Pharaoh. That's the truth. All the male boys, all the male babies, as soon as they were born, they were bound to death anyways. And the people actually, not only that, if they meet a Hebrew boy, they told them to actually push them into the Nile. So that's basically their current state. But because the Egyptians were actually helping them by providing straw, but they think that because Aaron and Moses actually came, they're no longer, given straw, and that's why they're being killed. No, they were already in trouble. They were already being killed. They were already all dying off one by one. But the problem is this. Don't forget this. The fact that God actually sent Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh is to reveal the work of salvation that he is performing in the Israelites. And that's basically the beginning. People don't know this, but the ones that are behind them is actually the darkness of forces of darkness that is represented by Pharaoh, and also the watchman that is actually abusing them. Do you have, your own business? Do you have, some kind of a company that you're working with, a contract? This is the same thing, the relationship between people to people. All there is basically being bitten by snakes left and right. To say that we are living by faith, no. All we have is just things to be bitten by snakes. But a life where you live by faith. That's right. We received the gospel and confirmed it within something that was good. And people think that our gospel is, something that's good. And we kept on, try to align the gospel to our own standard of good. But if it is by faith, then truly course it is good. But because it has nothing to do with our standard, even if it's not good, it's still irrelevant to your standard because it needs to be seen from the perspective of God's work. And you need to be able to live by faith because that's when everything is revealed. Our darkness. And through these foremen, it's actually being revealed. Through the Hebrews, it's being revealed. And it's the same for the people of believers today. And what comes after that? Moses and Aaron actually gathered all the elders of Israel, and the elders were basically joyful and they worshipped God. So how great it would be if they all just went together like that. I'm telling you, it was great then. And of course, that's not the reason why they actually went before the Pharaoh, because God made them go in front of the Pharaoh, because they had to do it by faith. In conclusion, it's not salvation that has come upon them, but they thought that they were in trouble. Just like they said, may the Lord, basically they said, you have made us a stench to Pharaoh and his officials, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. And what do they say? May the Lord look upon you and judge you. So Moses and Aaron is doing whose work? They're doing, revealing God's work of salvation. And for Pharaoh to do that, it's basically normal. And for the Egyptians to attack the Israelites is actually normal. But the people who are being saved are the people who have been given the covenant. But these are the words of Hebrews saying to Moses and Aaron, may the Lord look upon you and judge you. That's why. As much as Moses has his own flesh, he says, I can't do this anymore. Let's look at chapter 5. Actually, the time has come to end, and we will continue in the afternoon. Let us pray. Father God, may these words become light for our salvation. Allow service